I learned to stop hoping the year my husband died. Hope, I'd discovered, was a luxury women like me couldn't afford. 3 years I'd lived in the room above the post office. One window that looked out on Main Street. One chair by the stove. One tin plate I washed after every meal. I'd gotten good at counting by ones. One lamp, one blanket, one breath at a time until the day ended, and I could stop pretending I was living instead of just not dying. The post office opened at 7 each morning. I was always downstairs by 6:30, sorting the mail that had arrived on yesterday's stage, letters from back east, newspapers from Denver, packages wrapped in brown paper, and hope. Other people's hope. I just sorted it into the proper boxes and handed it over the counter when folks came to claim it. I'd perfected the art of not seeing them. Not really. I saw hands reaching for mail, heard voices saying thank you, watched faces I'd known all my life pass by my window like clouds. Present, but distant. There but untouchable. Safe. The locked door between my counter and the public space was my favorite thing about the job. I controlled who came in. I decided when to unlock it. When to lock it again? For someone who'd lost all control the day the mine collapsed and took Jacob with it, that locked door meant everything. December came the way it always did in Wyoming. Cold that pressed against thin walls. Wind that found every crack. Sky the color of old pewter, heavy with snow that hadn't fallen yet, but would. I wore the same black dress I'd worn since the funeral. Widow's uniform. I'd stopped noticing it was the only dress I owned. The first letters arrived the second week of December. Children's handwriting, careful and hopeful, addressed to Santa Claus, North Pole. 5 of them that first day. I set them in a bin under the counter without reading them. Undeliverable mail. The postal regulations didn't say what to do with letters to fictional addresses, so I did nothing. Added them to the bin each day as more arrived. Told myself I'd figure it out later. Later was a word I'd gotten comfortable with. Later, I'd think about the future. Later, I'd consider leaving this town. Later, I'd deal with the fact that I was 28 years old and living like I was already dead. The letters kept coming. By mid-December, the bin was full. 20 letters, then 25, then 30. All addressed to Santa Claus. All in children's handwriting that made something twist in my chest. So I stopped looking at them at all. I ate my beans that night in the cold room. One tin plate balanced on my knees. The stove burned low because wood cost money, and I had almost none. My salary as postmistress was enough for rent and beans and not much else. I'd saved $47.82 in 3 years. Every penny I could spare beyond survival. I counted it sometimes at night, touched each coin, felt the weight of my security in my hands. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The only thing between me and complete helplessness. The wind rattled my window. I pulled the single blanket tighter and thought about nothing at all. I'd gotten good at that too. Daniel McAllister came to the post office twice a week for the ranch mail. He'd been coming for years, always polite, always trying to engage me in conversation beyond what was necessary. I'd always kept him at the exact distance required by professional courtesy and nothing more. He smelled like hay and winter sun. Alive things. It annoyed me how alive he seemed. Tuesday morning he came in while I was sorting the latest batch of Santa letters. The pile had grown to fill an entire mail sack now. 40 letters at least. Maybe more. They sat beside my sorting table like an accusation I couldn't quite ignore. "Morning, Helen," he said, hat in his hands. "Mr. McAllister." I didn't look up from the regular mail I was sorting. "Ranch mail's in the usual box. Appreciate it." He collected his letters, then paused. I felt him looking at the mail sack. "Those all going north." His voice held gentle humor. I gave him a clipped response. "Postal regulations don't specify procedures for letters to fictional addresses." "Ah." He was quiet for a moment. Then, must be a lot of believing going on this year. Something in his tone made me look up. His eyes were kind, too kind. It irritated me. "Children believe in rescue," I said. "They grow out of it." He studied my face in a way that made me want to lock the door between us. "You all right? Helen, nobody asked me that. Nobody had asked me that in 3 years." The question landed like a blow I hadn't braced for. "I'm fine." The words came out sharper than I intended. Was there anything else?" "No, ma'am." He put his hat back on, but something in his expression had shifted. Concern, maybe, or pity. I didn't want either one. "You take care now." After he left, I stood very still, staring at the mail sack. My hands were shaking. I didn't know why. Didn't want to know why. Daniel McAllister had always been too observant for my comfort. I'd perfected invisible, spent 3 years making myself into background, into function, into nothing that required noticing. But he kept seeing me anyway. Kept trying to make me into a person instead of just the widow who ran the post office. I'd heard he lost his father young. Ranch accident when he was 8 or 9. Grew up with his mother, struggling to keep them fed. Town gossip mentioned it sometimes, but I'd never let myself think about what that meant. Never let myself wonder if he saw something in me he recognized. That night, in my cold room, I couldn't stop thinking about his question. "You all right?" No. I wasn't all right. I hadn't been all right since the day they brought Jacob's body up from the mine. Since the day I realized I was alone with no money and no prospects and no idea how to survive. Since the day I stopped being Helen and became just the widow. But I'd gotten very good at pretending it didn't matter. At moving through days like they were tasks to complete instead of time to live. At making myself so small and quiet and invisible that nobody would notice I'd stopped being alive and started just not dying. Daniel had noticed. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and listened to the wind. Wondered when I'd started counting his visits. When his footsteps on the post office floor had become familiar instead of intrusion. When I'd begun to notice the smell of sun on hay that meant he'd been working outside. The sound of his voice saying my name like it still meant something. I hated that I'd noticed. Hated more that I didn't hate it as much as I should. The notice from the postal inspector arrived December 16th. All undeliverable mail must be processed by December 20th. Logged, categorized, or destroyed per regulation. I stared at it like it was written in a language I'd forgotten how to read. The mail sack sat in the corner, full of Santa letters I'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. 48 of them now. I'd counted that morning without meaning to. Processing them meant opening them. Logging sender information. Reading what children had written to someone who didn't exist. Asking for things that wouldn't come. I didn't want to read them. Reading them would make them real. Make the children real. Make their hoping real. I'd spent 3 years teaching myself not to feel anything for anyone. And these letters threatened every wall I'd built. But the regulation was clear. December 20th. 4 days away. Daniel came in during my lunch hour. I was standing at the sorting table, staring at the mail sack with something that felt like dread sitting heavy in my chest. "Helen." His voice was quiet. Careful. "You all right?" There was that question again. Twice in 1 week. I wanted to tell him to stop asking. Wanted to tell him I'd be fine if everyone would just leave me alone to not live in peace. Instead, I showed him the inspector's notice. "Have to process these by the 20th. I said, "Open them. Log the information. 48 letters. Want help?" The offer came so simply. No pity in it. No judgment. Just want help. My instinct screamed, no. I always said no. No to help. No to company. No to anything that might crack the careful shell I'd built around myself. No had kept me safe for 3 years. But I was behind on regular mail because I'd been avoiding this task. And the truth was, I didn't think I could open those letters alone. Didn't think I could read children's hoping without breaking in ways I couldn't afford to break. After hours, I heard myself say, 6 o'clock? He nodded. I'll bring coffee. You don't fair trade, he said. I help you sort letters. You let me buy you coffee at the hotel. That work, I should have said no. Should have told him this was professional obligation. Nothing more. Should have kept every boundary exactly where it had been for 3 years. That works, I said instead. He smiled. Just a small one, but it changed his whole face. Made him look younger. Made me notice things I didn't want to notice. Like the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. The way his whole posture relaxed like I'd given him something valuable instead of just agreeing to coffee. He left with the ranch mail. I stood at my sorting table and felt every careful boundary I'd built begin to crack. At 6 o'clock exactly, he showed up at the back door, hat in hand, respectful as Sunday church. I'd changed into my other dress, then changed back. Angry at myself for caring what I wore. This was work. This was regulation compliance. This was nothing. I unlocked the door and let him in, locked it behind us. The click of the lock sounded different than it usually did. Felt different. Like I'd locked us in together instead of locking the world out. For 3 years. Nobody had been in the post office after hours. Just me and the silence I'd built around myself like a wall. Now Daniel stood in my space, filling it with his presence, his kindness. His 2 observant eyes that saw things I didn't want seen. Where do we start? He asked. I pulled the mail sack to the sorting table, poured out the letters. 48 envelopes scattered across the wood surface, each one addressed in careful child handwriting to Santa Claus, North Pole. I'll log names, I said. You can read them, see what they're asking for. He picked up the first letter, opened it carefully. Like it mattered. Like the child who wrote it mattered. And just like that, we began. The first evening, we barely spoke, just lamplight and the scratch of my pen logging names. The mail sack empty now. Its contents spread across the sorting table in piles Daniel had organized without me asking. He read the first letter aloud. Not to me. Exactly. More like he was reading to himself, but letting me hear. Dear Santa. His voice was quiet, respectful. Could you bring me boots? My toes freeze on the walk to school. Thank you. Tommy Henderson. Something in the way he read it, no pity, no condescension. Just acknowledgement of a child's dignity made me actually listen, instead of just hearing words. I wrote Henderson. Tommy, request boots. Then I looked up and found Daniel watching me. Tommy's 8, he said. His pa works at the mine. Good family. Proud. I know them. I did. Saw them Sundays on the street. Never really looked. Never let myself see them as people instead of just customers collecting mail. He picked up another letter. Dear Santa, could you please bring flour for bread Mama says we're running low? And maybe some warm socks. Sarah Jensen. I wrote it down. Jensen. Sarah. Request flour. Socks. The letters kept coming. Not toy requests, not the things children usually asked Santa for in stories. These were survival prayers dressed up as Christmas wishes. Blankets because the cabin had cracks. Medicine for Mama's cough. A warm coat because the old one was too small. Food because Pa lost his job. Practical, desperate things that made my chest feel tight and my hands shake as I logged them. By the second evening, Something had shifted. The silence between us felt different. Less like walls, more like understanding. Like we were both holding these children's hopes carefully, even though we knew there was no Santa to answer them. Daniel had rebuilt the stove fire without commenting on how low I kept it, had brought coffee without asking if I wanted it, had organized the letters into piles I hadn't requested, but found myself grateful for immediate need. Simple wishes, family situations. I noticed his gentle handling of each letter. The way he smoothed creases before reading. The way his voice softened when a request was particularly heartbreaking. The way he looked at me sometimes, checking if I was all right without asking the question out loud. I noticed too much. His hands on the paper. The smell of hay and winter sun that came in with him. The sound of his breathing in the quiet post office. The way the lamplight caught in his hair. I'd spent 3 years not noticing anything. Now I was noticing everything. "This one's hard," he said, voice tight. I looked up. He was holding a letter, staring at it like it hurt. "What is it, dear Santa?" He read, "I don't need nothing, but could you help my mama? She cries at night since Papa died. I hear her through the wall. Maybe you could bring something to make her stop being sad." Billy Crawford. Daniel's hands trembled, just slightly, but I saw it. Saw old pain cross his face. Saw him somewhere else for a moment, 8 years old, and listening to his own mother cry through thin walls. "How old were you?" I asked. "When your father died." He looked up. Surprised I knew. Surprised I was asking. 9, ranch accident, kicked by a horse. I'm sorry. Long time ago. But his voice said it wasn't. Not really. Pain like that didn't fade. Just learned to hide better. My mama cried at night, too. I used to lie awake and listen, wishing I could fix it, wishing I was big enough to help. I wasn't. I understood that feeling. Understood helplessness. Understood lying awake, wishing you could fix things that were too broken to fix. We sat in the lamplight for a long moment. 2 people who'd lost fathers, learned widow's cold from different angles, survived by shutting down parts of ourselves that hurt too much to feel. 48 letters, I said finally. 48 children who believe someone's listening. Are you, he asked quietly, listening? I looked at the sorted piles, the careful handwriting, the desperate prayers dressed as Christmas wishes. I'm trying not to. Why? Because listening meant caring. Caring meant feeling. Feeling meant breaking open all the careful numbness I'd built to survive. Because I knew there was no Santa Claus to answer. No magical rescue coming. Just 48 children who'd wake up Christmas morning to nothing. And me unable to help because I had nothing to give. Because I can't do anything about it, I said. What's the point of listening if you can't help? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then maybe listening is helping. Maybe being witnessed matters, even if nothing changes. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that was pretty philosophy, but didn't feed hungry children or warm, cold mothers. But looking at his face, at the old pain that still lived there, I wondered if maybe he was right. If maybe being seen had mattered to that 9-year-old boy listening to his mother cry. If maybe it mattered that someone, somewhere, was reading these letters and caring, even if they couldn't fix it. You're too kind for your own good. Daniel McAllister, I said. You say that like it's a bad thing. Kindness requires you to feel things. Feelings hurt. So does not feeling. He met my eyes. Trust me. I know. A woman for the first time in 3 years. I didn't want to be alone with my grief. Didn't want the silence of my cold room and my single tin plate and my carefully maintained numbness. I wanted to sit in this lamplight with someone who understood, reading children's letters and feeling the hurt of it together. That terrified me more than anything. Christmas Eve was 5 days away. We'd logged 47 letters. One remained. I'd seen it that second evening, recognized the careful child's handwriting, set it aside without reading it, told myself I'd log it later. But later became the next evening, and I still couldn't touch it. Something about that letter felt dangerous, like reading it would break something in me that I'd worked too hard to keep intact. Daniel noticed. Of course. He noticed everything. Last one, he said gently, touching the envelope I'd been avoiding. I know. Want me to read it? I should have said yes. Should have let him carry this weight like he'd carried so many others these past evenings. But this one felt different. Felt like it was meant for me specifically, though I didn't know why. My hands shook as I picked it up, opened it, unfolded the careful writing. Dear Santa, Mama has been so cold since Papa died. Could you bring just one blanket? I don't need anything else. Thank you. Anna Miller. The words blurred. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. Because I knew exactly the cold this child was describing. Not just winter cold, widow's cold. The chill of sleeping alone in a bed meant for two. Of no warm body to share heat with. Of grief that settles in your bones and makes you physically colder no matter how high you build the fire. How was that cold, Mama? Living in my one room with my one thin blanket. Freezing every night, not just from December, but from 3 years of being alone. This child had written to Santa about me. About every widow trying to survive winter. About the cold that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with loss. The letter trembled in my hands. I couldn't read it out loud. Couldn't make my voice work. Daniel took it gently. Read it silently. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Helen, he said, just my name, but it contained everything. I see you. I understand. You're not alone in this. I broke. Not dramatic sobbing, not the wild grief I'd felt at Jacob's funeral. Just quiet tears I hadn't let myself cry in 3 years. Tears for every widow facing winter alone. Every child watching their mother suffer. Every person trying to survive on courage and beans and one thin blanket. I'm sorry. I managed. I don't apologize. Daniel's voice was rough. God, Helen. Don't apologize for being human. I told him then. About Jacob. About the mine collapse that took him and 6 other men on an October afternoon 3 years ago. About how I'd been 25 and suddenly alone with no money and no prospects. About taking this job because it came with the room upstairs and asked nothing of my heart. About choosing this half-life because it was safe. Because not feeling anything meant nothing could hurt me. Because I'd learned that the only way to survive loss was to stop letting anyone or anything in. I live in one cold room on almost nothing, I said. I eat beans from one tin plate. I have $47 saved, and that's everything I own in the world. And I've told myself for 3 years that this is survival. This is strength. This is what you do when everything gets taken from you. What is it really? Daniel asked quietly. Dying slowly instead of all at once? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, you want to hear my story? I nodded. I was 8 when Papa died. He said, Mama tried to keep the ranch going, but it was too much. We were down to nothing by that Christmas. No food, no wood for heat. I remember being so cold I couldn't sleep. Remember hearing Mama cry every night and feeling like it was my fault somehow. Like if I was bigger, stronger, better. I could fix it. He paused, looking at something I couldn't see. Some memory that still hurt. Christmas morning. There was a box on our porch. No note. No name. But it was full. Food enough for a month. Blankets. A warm coat for me. Firewood already chopped and stacked. Someone had given everything to save us. You never found out who never, Mama asked around town, but nobody would say it was anonymous kindness, pure as snow. He met my eyes. That gift saved us, gave Mama time to find work, gave me a childhood instead of starvation. Whoever did that, they changed my whole life, and they never asked for recognition or thanks. They just gave. I understood what he was saying, understood the weight of anonymous kindness, the way it could echo through years, save a family, create ripples that spread far beyond one moment. You want to help these children, I said. Want to be what someone was for you. I want to believe kindness still exists, he said. Want to believe people still care about each other enough to give when it costs them. Want to believe in something bigger than just surviving? He saw me. Saw the truth I'd hidden from everyone. Maybe even myself. That I wasn't living. That I was just not dying. One cold day at a time. That I'd chosen safety over life and called it strength, when really it was fear. I don't know how to be any different, I whispered. Maybe you start by reading one letter. He said, by letting yourself feel it, by believing that caring matters even if you can't fix everything. We sat in the lamplight until it burned low. Two people who'd lost too much, survived too carefully, protected ourselves from life until we forgot what living felt like. But tonight, we'd let ourselves feel. Let ourselves break open just enough to remember that beneath all the numbness and caution and fear, we were still human, still capable of caring, still alive enough to hurt. And somehow, impossibly, that made it bearable. Christmas Eve arrived, and I couldn't sleep. I lay in my cold room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about 48 letters logged and filed and ready for the postal inspector's review. My official duty was done. The letters would be destroyed after inspection. The children who wrote them would wake Christmas morning to nothing. My mind kept returning to the blanket letter. To Anna Miller, asking for one blanket for her cold mama. To Tommy Henderson's frozen toes. To Billy Crawford wishing his mama would stop crying. I thought about Daniel's story, about someone who'd given everything anonymously to save his family, about how that kindness had echoed through years, shaped who he became, created the gentle man who sat with me reading children's letters like they mattered. The difference between doing my job and doing what was right pressed on my chest until I couldn't breathe. At dawn, I got up, walked to my dresser, counted my savings like I did every month. $47.82. 3 years of careful hoarding. Every penny I had beyond this month's rent and beans, I thought about what it could buy. Not 48 blankets, not enough to help everyone, but something. Enough for something. The walk to the mercantile took forever. The sun was just rising. Christmas morning. Pink and gold on snow that had finally fallen during the night. Nobody else was awake yet. Just me and my reckless decision and the terror singing in my blood. Mr. Henderson answered my knock, looking confused. Helen, it's Christmas morning. Store's closed. I know. I'm sorry, but I pulled out the letters I'd brought. 12 of them. The most desperate. The blanket request. The flour. The medicine. I need to buy things. For these families. He read the first letter, then the second. His weathered face softened. How much you got? I showed him my money. All of it. Every penny. He calculated in his head, lips moving. "I can do 12 family packages," he said finally. "Blankets, food staples, warm socks. But it'll take everything you got." "I know. You sure about this? Helen? That's all your savings. Every step to the mercantile. I'd been able to turn back, keep my money, keep my safety, keep my careful, cold, dead life. But I'd kept walking, I'm sure." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Give me an hour. I'll put it together. And Helen, I'm adding some extras. Christmas discount." He didn't charge me for the additions. Extra flour. More blankets than my money should have bought. Medicine I hadn't asked for. He packed it all while I stood in the cold store, shaking with terror and exhilaration. This was the most reckless thing I'd done in 3 years, maybe in my whole life. Spending everything with no backup plan, making myself completely vulnerable. Choosing to care about strangers' children when I could barely care for myself. It felt terrifying. It felt right. It felt like the first real choice I'd made since Jacob died. I spent Christmas Day delivering packages, 12 families. Walking through snow in the early morning, leaving boxes on doorsteps before anyone woke. Anonymous. No notes, no names, just here. Someone heard you. Someone cares. The Miller house was last. I set the package with 3 blankets by their door. Thought about Anna inside. Probably still sleeping. Thought about her cold mama, widow, like me, trying to survive winter alone. I hoped the blankets helped. Hoped they felt like arms around them. Hoped they knew someone understood. By noon, I sat in my room with absolutely nothing, empty purse, no food beyond a crust of bread, nothing between me and potential disaster. I'd made myself completely vulnerable in a world that punished vulnerability. But I'd also felt truly alive for the first time in 3 years. Terrified. Yes, reckless. Absolutely. But alive. God help me. Alive. The terror caught up with me by nightfall. I cataloged my recklessness in the dark. What if I got sick? What if the post office closed? What if there was an emergency? I had nothing saved. Nothing to fall back on. I'd destroyed my only security for one day of feeling good about myself. The familiar voice of fear whispered, "This is what happens when you let yourself care. This is what happens when you open up. Loss, pain, suffering. You should have kept yourself safe." I thought about packing my single bag, catching the morning train east, finding another anonymous town where nobody knew me, another closed-off life, another 3 years of not dying. The night was long. The kind of long where you argue with yourself in circles until you can't remember which voice is fear and which is truth. I'd been so afraid of losing what little I had. I'd never let myself have anything worth having. Not connection, not purpose, not love in any form. Just safety and loneliness and one tin plate in a cold room. Was one day of feeling alive worth it? Worth destroying my security? Worth this terror? I thought about Daniel reading that blanket letter with tears in his eyes. Thought about Tommy Henderson waking to boots that would keep his toes warm. Thought about Billy Crawford's mama opening a box that said, "You're not alone. Someone sees you. Someone cares." Maybe I'd been asking the wrong question. Maybe it wasn't about worth. Maybe it was about becoming someone who could live with herself. Someone who'd tried instead of someone who'd stayed safe and let children freeze. Just before dawn, exhausted, I made a tentative peace. I'd rather have given everything and suffered for it than kept myself safe and dead inside forever. Even if I regretted it tomorrow, Tonight, I meant it. The knock came just as gray light touched my window. Helen. Daniel's voice through the door, worried. You there? I walked to the door, put my hand on the knob, and chose, one more time, not to run. I opened the door to Daniel's worried face and 20 miners standing behind him in dawn light. For a moment, I couldn't process it. Couldn't understand why Daniel and half the mine crew were at my door before sunrise the day after Christmas. Couldn't make sense of the expression on his face, concern mixed with something that looked like pride. What, you weren't at Christmas service, he said. I got worried. Went to see Mr. Henderson. He paused. He told me what you did. Heat flooded my face. Shame or embarrassment, or something I couldn't name. I'd wanted it to be anonymous. Wanted nobody to know the foolish widow had spent her last penny on strangers' children. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. His voice cracked slightly. Helen, you spent everything you had. Behind him, the miners shifted. Big men who worked underground in darkness. Now standing in dawn light, looking at me like I'd done something that mattered. I told them. Daniel continued. Told them about the letters, about what you did, about my story, about anonymous kindness and how it changes everything. One of the miners stepped forward. Jack Morrison, who'd worked with Jacob. We took a collection last night, he said. Went door to door. Every mining family contributed. We got enough to reimburse you, complete and help the rest of the families who wrote letters. He held out a leather pouch, heavy with coins. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. This couldn't be real. 20 miners collecting money on Christmas night to reimburse a foolish widow who'd given away her savings. I can't, you can, Daniel said gently. Someone helped my family once, anonymous. I never got to give back to them. Let me give back to you. Let all of us give back. That's how this works. Kindness doesn't go in a straight line. It circles. I thought about refusing. Pride screaming that I didn't need charity. Independence demanding I survive on my own terms. But I looked at their faces and saw something else. Saw them wanting to be part of something good. Saw them understanding what I'd done because they'd all struggled, all survived on almost nothing. All knew what winter meant to families with empty cupboards. I took the pouch, felt the weight of community in my hands. Thank you, I whispered. But Daniel wasn't done. There's more. We want to organize ongoing support, not just Christmas, year-round help for widows and struggling families. But it needs someone to lead it, someone who understands what it's like. He met my eyes. Would you help us build something that lasts? This was the real choice. Not spending my savings that had been impulse, emotion, one night's courage. This was choosing to stay open every day to keep feeling, to keep caring, to lead others in caring when I'd spent 3 years teaching myself not to care at all. I could take the money and return to safe isolation. Lock my door again. Go back to my one tin plate and my careful numbness and my half-life that hurt less. Because it felt less, or I could say yes, could choose to live. Choose to believe connection was worth the risk. Choose to become someone who mattered instead of someone who just survived. I thought about 48 children who'd believed someone was listening. Thought about Anna Miller and her cold mama. Thought about the gift someone had given Daniel's family that changed his whole life. Thought about the circle of kindness, how it didn't go straight, but spiraled out, touching people you'd never meet in ways you'd never know. Yes, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Yes, I'll help. Yes, I'll lead it. Daniel's face transformed. Relief and joy and something else I couldn't quite name. He'd seen me make the choice before I'd known I was making it. Had believed I would say yes, even when I wasn't sure myself. "We'll meet next week," Jack Morrison said. "Figure out the details. But Helen, what you did mattered. You started something bigger than any of us." They left as the sun cleared the horizon, 20 miners heading to breakfast with their families, carrying the knowledge that kindness still existed, that people still cared enough to give when it cost them. I stood in my doorway, holding a leather pouch full of money I'd never expected to see again. But more than that, holding possibility, purpose, connection. I'd spent 3 years choosing safety over life. That morning, I chose differently, and it terrified me. And it felt like waking up after 3 years of sleepwalking. And I didn't know if I could sustain it. This choosing to care. This staying open to hurt. But for the first time since Jacob died, I wanted to try. Daniel had stayed behind. He stood on the stairs looking up at me with that too observant gaze that saw everything I tried to hide. "You all right?" he asked. There was that question again. But this time, I had a different answer. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I think maybe I want to be." He smiled. "That's a start." "Daniel, thank you. For seeing what I did. For making it mean something bigger. You did that," he said. "I just helped people see what was already there." He paused. "The coffee invitation still stands. When you're ready." I nodded, couldn't quite speak. Watched him walk down Main Street toward the ranch, morning light catching in his hair. Then I went inside. Counted the money in the pouch. More than I'd spent. More than I'd saved in 3 years. Enough to feel secure and help others both. I'd broken myself open. And instead of destroying me, it had made me whole. Had connected me to something larger than my own survival. Had given me purpose beyond just not dying. I didn't know how to sustain this. Didn't know if I could keep choosing vulnerability over safety, caring over numbness, life over mere existence. But I knew I was going to try. By spring, we'd created something that mattered more than any of us alone. The first meeting happened in the church hall the first week of January. 23 widows came. Women I'd seen for years without really seeing. Women who'd been surviving in their own cold rooms, their own isolated struggles, their own careful numbness. I told them my story, about the letters, about spending everything, about being terrified and reckless and choosing to care anyway, about learning that breaking open was the only way to truly heal. They told me theirs. About lost husbands and empty cupboards and children they couldn't quite provide for. About pride that kept them from asking for help and fear that kept them small. About winter nights crying into pillows and wondering if they'd make it through. We were all the cold mama from Anna Miller's letter. Every single one of us. What if we helped each other? I said. What if we stopped surviving alone? The network built itself from there. Widow-to-widow support that looked different than charity. Childcare exchanges so women could work. Food sharing that preserved dignity. Job leads and skill teaching and comfort during dark nights that never quite ended. The miners contributed monthly portions of wages. Local businesses donated goods. What started as my reckless Christmas kindness became sustainable community care. But more than logistics, we became family. Real family. Chosen and built from shared understanding. We knew each other's worst days, saw each other's grief without flinching, held each other through darkness because we'd all been there. All knew what it felt like to want to give up. All understood why sometimes you needed someone to sit beside you while you cried without trying to fix it. My life transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined that Christmas Eve when I counted my savings and made my reckless choice. I still lived in the room above the post office. Still sorted mail, 6 days a week. But now I had coffee every Wednesday with other widows, laughing over shared stories and crying over shared pain. Now I helped distribute support packages, coordinated work opportunities, knew every child's name in town and half their stories. The post office wasn't a place to hide anymore. It was a place to connect. People came not just for mail, but to talk, to ask for help, to offer help. My locked door stayed unlocked more often than not. And Daniel, we met weekly to coordinate network efforts. Shared coffee that turned into shared meals. Talked about everything and nothing, building something I didn't have words for yet. Not rushed romance. Something slower. Something built on respect and understanding, and the knowledge that we'd both survived darkness and chosen to step into light. "You didn't save me," I told him one evening. We were walking back from a widow network meeting, stars bright overhead, spring air soft after months of winter. "I need you to understand that. I saved myself." "I know," he said quietly, "but you saw me choose life. You walked beside me in the choosing. You made space for me to become something other than just the widow." I stopped walking, turned to face him. "That's different. That's better than saving." He smiled, the same smile that had crinkled his eyes that first evening when I'd agreed to let him help. "You've taught me something, too. What, that kindness doesn't end. That circle I told you about, it keeps going. You helped those families. They helped others. The widows help each other. And it just keeps spreading." He paused. "My whole life, I wanted to repay what someone gave my family. Turns out I was asking the wrong question. It's not about repaying. It's about continuing. Being part of the circle, I understood. Understood that we were all part of something larger than ourselves. That my reckless Christmas choice had been part of a circle that included Daniel's anonymous benefactor. Every widow helping another widow. Every miner giving part of his wages. Every child who'd written a letter believing someone would hear. I keep the blanket letter in my desk drawer. I told him, Anna Miller's letter. The one that broke me open. I look at it sometimes when I'm afraid. Remind myself that sometimes the smallest prayer answered is the beginning of the largest change. "Are you still afraid, terrified?" I admitted. "Every day I choose to care, to stay open, to believe connection is worth the risk." Part of me screams that I should go back to safety, back to numbness, back to one tin plate and locked doors. "But you don't?" "No," I smiled. "I don't. Because I've learned something stronger than fear." "What's that? That I'd rather live 1 year fully alive than 30 years just not dying. That caring about people is the whole point. That love in all its forms, romantic, familial. Community is what makes us human." I paused. "And that sometimes the greatest gift isn't what you keep, but what you give away." We walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Daniel said, "The coffee invitation still stands. The one I mentioned that first night? I've been patient. But Helen, I'd really like to take you to dinner. Not as network coordinators, as us." My heart jumped. Not with fear this time. With possibility. "I'd like that," I said. Yeah. I took his hand, felt the warmth of it, the aliveness. "I'm ready now. Took me a while. But I'm ready." His smile could have lit the whole dark street. I thought about the woman I'd been, the one who'd spent 3 years in a cold room telling herself that survival meant staying small and safe. and numb. The one who'd counted her savings, like they were the only thing between her and destruction. The one who'd been so afraid of losing what little she had that she'd never let herself have anything worth. I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd learned that grief could make you small and careful, hoarding even the little warmth you had. Or it could crack you open into something larger, someone who remembered cold well enough to share blankets. Someone who'd survived darkness and learned to hold light for others. I'd learned that the greatest courage wasn't protecting yourself from pain. It was opening yourself to love again, in all its forms and variations and terrifying possibilities. I'd learned that kindness circled, that what you gave away came back in ways you never expected. That community was built from individual acts of reckless caring, that sometimes breaking open was the only way to heal. Most of all, I'd learned that I was strong enough to survive loss, strong enough to risk loving again, strong enough to build a life that mattered instead of just a life that was safe. Thank you, I told Daniel, for not giving up on me, for seeing past the widow to the person underneath, for believing I could choose life even when I didn't believe it myself. You did the choosing, he said. I just kept the door open until you were ready to walk through it. Maybe that was what love looked like. Not rescue, not saving, just holding space for someone to save themselves, walking beside them while they figured it out, believing in them when they couldn't quite believe in themselves. I'd spent 3 years behind locked doors. Now I was walking under open sky with my hand in someone else's, heading toward a future I couldn't control or predict, and for the first time in 3 years. That felt like possibility instead of threat. Spring had come to Wyoming, to the town, to the widow network, to me, and I was ready for it. Last week, a new widow came to the post office. Young, 26 maybe, wearing the black dress like armor. Buying stamps with trembling hands. I recognized her immediately. Not her face, but her posture. The way she held herself carefully, like she might shatter if she moved wrong. The way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I recognized myself 3 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss, I said gently. She nodded. Couldn't speak. Paid for the stamps and turned to leave. Wait. I poured coffee from the pot I kept now. Set out 2 cups. Sit with me a minute. She hesitated, then sat, took the coffee with hands that shook. I didn't ask questions, didn't push, just sat with her in companionable silence until she was ready to talk. He died last month, she whispered finally. Ranch accident. We have 2 children. I don't know how I'm going to survive this. You will, I said. Not because you want to, not because it's easy, but because you'll get up every morning and do the next thing, and the next, and eventually you'll realize you've survived another day. Is that enough? Just surviving? No. I met her eyes, but it's where you start. And when you're ready, when you're strong enough, you'll have to choose if you want to just survive or if you want to live, really live. How did you choose? I thought about Christmas Eve 3 years ago. About 48 letters and 1 reckless decision. About Daniel's patient kindness and 20 miners standing in dawn light. About the widow network and community care and learning that breaking open was how you healed. I read a letter from a little girl asking Santa for a blanket for her cold mama. I said. And I saw myself in that mama, saw every widow trying to survive winter alone. And I realized I could keep being cold and alone and safe. Or I could break myself open and see what happened. What happened? I found purpose, community, love in forms I didn't expect. I learned that Giving away everything you have is sometimes how you find everything you need. I paused, but I also learned you can't rush it. You grieve as long as you need to. You survive however you can. And when you're ready, there are people waiting to help you choose life again. She sipped her coffee. Is there really a widow network? I heard about it, but thought maybe it was just talk. Very real. We meet Wednesday afternoons. 23 widows helping each other. Childcare, food, job leads, just company when the nights are too dark. You'd be welcome. I don't know if I'm ready. Come when you are. Or don't come at all. The invitation stands either way. I refilled her coffee. But you should know you're not alone. Even when you feel like you are. Even when you're in that dark room convinced nobody understands. You're not alone. We've all been there. We all know what it's like. She left 20 minutes later. Walked a little straighter, carried her grief a little less alone. I watched her go and remembered being that woman. Remembered the day Daniel had asked if I was all right, and I'd wanted to tell him to stop seeing me. Remembered the terror of letting someone in. Remembered choosing to spend everything on children's letters because it was the first time in 3 years. I'd felt truly alive. The post office was different now. Spring sunshine through windows I kept open. 2 coffee cups by the pot. Laughter sometimes when widows stopped by to chat. Mail that connected instead of separated. A locked door that stayed unlocked because I'd learned the difference between protecting yourself and imprisoning yourself. Daniel stopped by that afternoon for the ranch mail. We'd had dinner 3 times now. Real dates where we talked about everything except loss and grief. Learning each other as people instead of just survivors. It was slow and sweet and terrifying and wonderful. New widow? He asked, nodding toward where the young woman had disappeared down Main Street. Yeah. Lost her husband last month. 2 kids. You talked to her. Told her about the network. Told her she's not alone. I smiled. Told her the same things you told me. In different words. That she'll survive. That she'll have to choose, eventually. That there are people waiting when she's ready. Good. He collected his mail, then paused. You know what I think about sometimes? What that Christmas, 3 years ago when someone left that box for my family, I used to think it was the end of their kindness. 1 act. Complete. Done. But now I wonder if maybe it was part of a circle so big we can't see the whole shape. Maybe they'd been helped once too. Maybe that's why they knew exactly what we needed. Maybe. I agreed. And maybe someday that young widow will help someone else. Maybe one of those children who got blankets will grow up and remember. We'll give something to someone who needs it. Maybe we're all just links in a chain so long, we'll never see the end of it. I like that. Makes it feel less lonely. Less like we're struggling alone and more like we're all connected. We are connected. I touched his hand briefly. That's what I learned. That we're all cold mamas and frozen children and people trying to survive winter. And when we help each other, when we choose to care even when it costs us, we become something bigger than ourselves. He smiled. Dinner Saturday. I'd like that. After he left. I stood at my sorting table and looked at the mail waiting to be distributed. Letters from back east. Packages wrapped in hope. Connection. Traveling through my hands to reach people who needed it. I thought about the woman I'd been. The one who'd sorted this same mail without seeing it. Without caring. Without letting anything touch her frozen heart. The one who'd counted her savings at night and called it security, when really it was just fear dressed up as wisdom. I thought about the choice I'd made. To read those letters. To spend everything. To break myself open and see what happened. It had been reckless and terrifying and the best decision of my life. Because I'd learned that sometimes the greatest gift isn't what you keep, but what you give away. That the greatest strength isn't protecting your heart, but risking it. That the greatest courage isn't surviving alone, but choosing to live together. I'd learned that grief was real and painful and permanent, but it didn't have to make you small. That loss could crack you open or seal you shut, and the choice was yours to make. That community was built from individual acts of reckless kindness. That love came in all forms: romantic, familial, communal, and all of them mattered. Most of all, I'd learned that I was strong enough to survive the worst, strong enough to risk caring again, strong enough to build a life that had meaning instead of just safety. The locked door between my counter and the public space stood open now. I never locked it anymore during business hours. Didn't need to, didn't want to. Because I'd learned that protecting yourself from pain also protected you from joy. That walls kept out hurt, but also kept out love. That the only way to truly live was to stay open, stay vulnerable, stay willing to break and heal again. Spring sunshine filled my post office. Coffee sat ready for whoever needed it. The Widow Network met in 2 days. Daniel would take me to dinner Saturday. 23 widows were helping each other survive and eventually thrive. Families who'd received anonymous Christmas gifts were paying it forward in their own ways. The circle kept turning, and I was learning to live again. Not just survive, not just get through each day, but actually live, feel deeply, care recklessly, love bravely, risk beautifully. It terrified me still. Some days I wanted to retreat back to my cold room and one tin plate and careful numbness. But I didn't. Because I'd tasted life, and I couldn't go back to just not dying. That Christmas, I didn't just help some children. I saved myself. And then, together, we saved each other. That's the story I tell new widows when they come to my post office, wearing grief like armor. That's the truth I learned in 48 letters from children who believed someone was listening. We save each other through kindness, through caring, through choosing to break open instead of seal shut, through believing that connection is worth the risk, and love is worth the hurt, and life is worth the living. We save each other, and the circle keeps turning, 2-2.